Now, before we get to our audience questions, let's have a look at something different. The writer Graham Linehan this week shared a shocking resignation letter from a John Lewis employee on his Substack. Leslie Pickup, who was a selling partner at John Lewis's Cheadle branch, describes how trans activists within the company are seemingly compromising the safety of female staff and customers. She writes, without negotiation, unilaterally, arbitrarily, and without their consent or any say in the matter whatsoever, they, as in staff members, are now expected to be completely and without question subservient to the needs of their male colleagues. She goes on to describe how female colleagues live in fear of speaking out, as men who identify as women at work are given access to female-only spaces. According to Ms. Pickup, John Lewis has told female staff unhappy about the situation that they can just use the disabled toilets. And if they disagree with biological men in the female changing rooms, they will be provided with a small locker a little distance away. So this is how Ms. Pickup ends the letter. She says, I will not be serving out my 2 weeks' notice, as I am not prepared to set foot in an establishment, either as an employee or a customer, that chooses to treat its female members of staff with such disregard when it comes to their safe spaces. So all of this letter can be read on Graham Linehan's Substack, so I urge you to check that out. We did invite John Lewis to provide a representative to talk about this evening, but they declined. Cressida, what do you make of this? This is quite a shocking resignation letter, isn't it?
It is shocking and it isn't. I mean, they've got form. We know John Lewis had a magazine in February this year for their staff. It went out to 70,000 people and it had content in it that was really promoting mermaids' ideas, the activist group.
Yes.
It was talking about chest binders and giving advice to potentially trans children and their parents and telling parents how to educate themselves, which is extraordinary because you think, what on earth that got to do with an in-house publication about selling candles? I've no idea.
Yes.
So this sort of is in the same area, isn't it?
But what do you make of that? I mean, if you were an employee at John Lewis, you would expect to be able to get changed in a female-only space. I mean,
absolutely.
Not too much to ask, is it?
Of course it isn't. And what's so shocking about this is that the staff haven't been consulted at all. And we hear so much about consent. That's like a really big topic in our society. Haven't bothered with that. It'll be fine. We're just going to do our activism and you can get on with it.
Yeah, I mean, this is it's pretty poor form, isn't it? And I think it's particularly bad that John Lewis won't comment on this at all.
Yeah, for me, that's a really important point. We all understand the ideologies way out there, and I think mad in many ways.
Yes.
However, I think the real culprits here are the people that just willfully accept it, despite all the blind spots. Like 50% of their staff might be put off by it, and of course we all discuss this as men in women's spaces. Because they just accept it carte blanche, they don't accept that it's men in women's spaces, they accept it's women in women's spaces, irrespective, as this lady said in her full letter. And as you say, I would go and read this Substack because the full letter is quite something to behold, really. She says there are actually men that before, are men outside of work, are married men, have all the dangly bits men have, and then when they go to work, they want to dress as women and be women. That's the difference in their lives. And OK, so they are men, actual men going into women's spaces, into their toilets, into their locker rooms. Why would that not? I'd be more worried if it didn't unsettle you.
OK, now, it's interesting because I understand that there are some people who claim that to be a woman is an identity category. Yeah. It's not a biological thing, and that's a point of view. But I would suggest that that point of view is held by a very, very small minority, and I would suggest that the majority of female staff at John Lewis don't subscribe to that view. So why weren't they asked about this?
Because that very small view is so well protected that if you were to speak out about it, you could lose. This lady worked there for 20 years. You could be well into a career and thinking, all I really want to do is earn more money and climb the ladder. In order to do so, we all know this. When you're in a big organisation, you've got to play along with the game. Now the game is pretending men are women, and I think it's too far.
Because, I mean, you won't get promoted if you stand up and say something.
You get in trouble.
Yeah, we should say, I mean, the media hasn't really picked up on this at all. This hasn't been a story. The only place you can currently read about it is on Graham Linehan's Substack. And I would like to speak to anyone from John Lewis about this topic. So if anyone at John Lewis would like to come on next week, or any week indeed, that is an open invitation. I would love to have that conversation. I think it's important that your members of staff can hear that conversation, especially since they haven't been consulted in the decision-making process. I want to just finally ask you, though, Cressida, there's an extra element to this, which is to do with there will be some women, as Leslie Pickup points out in her resignation letter, there will be some women, statistically, working at John Lewis who have suffered sexual abuse, who have suffered trauma at the hands of men, who have very good reasons to want to be able to get change without men around. shouldn't they be prioritised in all of this?
Absolutely. And they also shouldn't have to go and use the disabled loo and identify themselves as having these problems. They might not want to talk about it. And there's also an issue with safeguarding children. She makes reference to people working there who are under 18 at John Lewis. So I don't know what John Lewis are expected to do to safeguard those children. But if there are men in girls' spaces, they're clearly not doing it.
Yes, OK. Well, I'll just reiterate, John Lewis, open invitation to come and talk about this. And if you want to read that full resignation letter, that's on Graham Linehan's Substack.
Should the Bank of England force its employees to declare their pronouns?
Yeah, this is a new gender-neutral language. Just stay a second, Steve, because I want to ask you about this. Do you think, I mean, this is the new training, leaked training materials from the Bank of England, but they've gone as far as to suggest that gender-critical views, saying that you know, a man is a man and a woman is a woman and you can't change sex, that should not be encouraged or allowed. What do you make of this?
Well, that sounds like common sense. I hadn't associated the Bank of England with common sense, but that's
no,
to be
the Bank
welcome.
of England is having a go at it. They're saying you can't say that. You know, if a member of staff says, "Oh, human beings can't change sex, that's just basic biology," the Bank of England will come down on them like a ton of coins.
Could that be why we're in such a mess?
Yeah, it's bizarre, isn't it? Cressida, do you have any views on this? I mean, this is pretty standard training material from any kind of institution that's Stonewall captured, effectively.
Yeah, absolutely. It feels like activism. I think what will happen is most people will go along with it for a quiet life.
Yeah.
And then every now and again you'll run into J.K. Rowling types who absolutely won't do it.
Yes.
And at that point the bank will lose because you are allowed to believe that sex is not changeable. That's
well, it's protected by law, exactly. But the problem with this is it always happens, and it keeps happening. And then someone brave enough stands up, and then there's a lawsuit, and they usually lose the first one, and then they win on appeal. And then the institution loses a lot of money. But they never learn, and they just go back and do it again.
And thankfully now we're still in a job.
Yeah, it's weird though, isn't it, Paul? I mean, can't we just say, you know, no more? Why should the Bank of England be training its members of staff to be ideologically skewed one way or the other? I mean, I would be just as concerned if they were training them to be Marxists or to be conservatives or to be whatever it might be.
Absolutely. You know, I mean, what do you want robots within your business, or do you want human beings?
I mean, they work better.
They would work better.
Yeah, you don't have to feed
that's
them.
a good point.
No holidays.
But ultimately, they've all got a sort of a left-leaning algorithm, so
there is that.
There'll still be a job for us.
Yes.
But what you know, I mean, the language used within the article that I read said that these employees, as is true of all these big organisations, are going to be told.
Yes.
Told that they have to. Like, it's mandated. Now, you can't... in order to tell someone, you then have to agree, everyone has to agree that it's important to everyone.
Yes.
Pronouns are important to everyone, which is just not true. If you went and said, completely off the record, to every employee within the Bank of England, what do you think on this? At least, I believe, 60, 70, maybe even as much as 80% would say they don't care for it. It doesn't make any difference from their
I know, it's always a
day-to-day.
minority who care about this.
So on that basis alone, where at what point in time did was it Stonewall? I don't know. But what point in time did things divert to the extreme that the minority's opinion is what has to overtake the whole philosophy?
Stonewall had a pretty good racket, you know, the Diversity Champions scheme, where they effectively give institutions points for doing what they said. So they go up the ranks for following Stonewall, and they pay Stonewall for
Yeah,
it.
exactly.
It is like a mafia racket.
Stonewall
It's kind
go
of
in
incredible.
as consultants, don't
Yeah,
they?
that's right,
Which is
that's
mad.
right.
We're going to come in, consult us, and we'll tell you what we think you should do, and then you can pay us for it.
Yeah, even if it's
What?
not necessarily in accordance with the law, because they have a habit of misrepresenting
Yes,
the law
they
as well. So, I mean, look, the truth is that announcing your pronouns or someone expecting you to announce your pronouns is effectively like a purity test. It's effectively like saying, are you on board with our sacred creed?
Yes.
I mean, that's really what
That's
it is.
all it
Check
is.
your thinking.
That is all it is, though, because you gain nothing, do you? Unless, you know, you're not too sure.
Yeah, and also you don't refer to someone with their pronouns. It's when they're not in the room. When I talk about you, Paul, then I use your pronouns.
You certainly do.
You wouldn't believe what I say. It's absolutely outrageous.
Is Robin DAngelo a plagiarist?
Well, Robin DAngelo, I should clarify, is the author of White Fragility, which is this book that became a huge bestseller after the Black Lives Matter riots. Did you read White Fragility?
No, I read all the books. I think you mentioned it in your book, The New Puritans.
I did. Thanks for the plug.
Various other people, Douglas Murray and various other people.
Well-
they read it so that I didn't have to.
Well, there we go. I mean, the reason why we all comment on this book in particular in our books is that White Fragility became the go-to book for people trying to understand this notion of systemic racism, even though it's written by a white woman and she's effectively saying all white people are racist. Society has been organised for racist purposes to uphold white people at the expense of everyone else. And if any white person disagrees with that, they are suffering from white fragility, and that therefore proves the point that she's making. It's a bit like the Kafka trap. She can't lose, right? It's a bit like if the witch drowns, then she, you know the story.
It never ends, does it? I think
No.
we have to continually re-educate ourselves.
Right, exactly. And which is lucky for Robin DAngelo, because she earns tens of thousands of dollars to go into corporations and berate their white staff and tell them to, quote, try to be less white. That's the advice she gave at Coca-Cola. How do you try to be less white? How do you do that?
Well, I haven't read it either. I'm like John. I've just read your books.
Oh, we should get back to the plagiarism point. It turns out Robin DAngelo has been ripping off whole passages from, get this, minority ethnic writers. Right, so this white woman, and it's interesting because the black press has picked up on this, but a lot of people in mainstream, left-leaning, very white press, they're a bit embarrassed, I think.
I bet they are, yeah.
So do you think we should... it's time for Robin DAngelo to be binned? What do you think?
Well, it'd be great if she came on here, wouldn't it, and discussed it with you.
love that.
Oh, my God.
She might want to repent. She's into that sort of thing. Not a good look.
I would love Robin DAngelo to come on this show. I mean, she absolutely wouldn't. She never likes being challenged, so she's only ever interviewed by people who are completely on board. Although I think Matt Walsh in his new film disguised himself and got a conversation with him. I could be wrong about that. Someone told me
What was the disguise? That's worrying.
No, he didn't do a
no
Justin
blacking
Trudeau.
up.
No, he didn't do that. I think he just wore a man bun or something and looked a bit vaguely...
To look woke 101.
Yeah, a bit vaguely hipsterish and annoying. So, you fan of Robin DAngelo? Have you read White Fragility?
I have definitely read more of it than John, and I've read the two books that you referred to as well. I couldn't read it all. I find it very divisive. She is responsible for the most dangerous and divisive policies, particularly within American schools, in the last 10 years. She's basically created a whole curriculum around telling white people and white children that they are bad, and if they don't think that they're bad, then they're double bad for thinking that they're not bad.
Yes.
And, it's amazing. If she'd written a book just on how to manage children, that would have been better.
Yeah, surely. Well, I should say that she absolutely denies the charges of plagiarism. I've seen the parallel texts. There are lots of phrases that appeared in other people's work, but I suppose it depends on your definition of plagiarism, doesn't it? Let's